Last spring, I reviewed one of my all-time favorite movies, Spider-Man, so it only makes sense for me to review Spider-Man 2 as well as eventually Spider-Man 3, leading up to the new Spider-Man 3 with Tom Holland. Hopefully it comes out in 2021 though. Spider-Man 2 is a 2004 film directed once again by Sam Raimi. It's the follow-up to the first Spider-Man, and it has the same exact cast, but this time it also stars Alfred Molina. In Spider-Man 2, Peter finds his life falling apart as he struggles to balance his personal time with being Spider-Man. According to many people, this is the top-tier Spider-Man movie. There is not a better Spider-Man movie thus far than Spider-Man 2 for a lot of superhero fans. For myself, I don't necessarily disagree with that statement. However, I don't think this movie is better than Spider-Man 1. I think it's on the same level as the first movie. These two are interchangeable. I can't see Spider-Man 1 without seeing Spider-Man 2. These movies are both incredible. Spider-Man 2 is basically Spider-Man 1B. Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 are two of my favorite childhood movies. I grew up watching these. They are very close to my heart. I can't imagine a world without either one of these movies. They are classics, and they are my two favorite superhero movies of all time. So for all of those people who think Spider-Man 2 is better than Spider-Man 1, it's not that I disagree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. But I still think you guys should recognize Spider-Man 1 as good of a movie as Spider-Man 2. I don't think either one is better than the other. So in this movie, Peter's life is kind of falling apart due to his responsibilities as Spider-Man. In the beginning of the movie, he gets fired from his pizza job. Later on, he has trouble keeping up with his friendships, like with Harry. He struggles to pay his rent. He can't keep up with his studies, and he even misses Mary Jane's play. And clearly, she is really ticked off about it. So Peter, in the beginning of this movie, is having a really tough time balancing Spider-Man with his personal life. And that's what this movie is all about. Peter succumbs to the pressure of being Spider-Man. He can't balance both things, so he quits being Spider-Man and instead tries going back to normal life, only he realizes that he can't do that because everyone on the city depends on him. Once again, just like the first movie, the characters in this film are all super relatable. They feel like real-life people. I wish I could just be friends with James Franco's Harry Osborn and Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, Mary Jane Watson, played by Kirsten Dunst, once again, fantastically. I feel like I know these characters in real life as if they are my friends, but the funny thing about this movie is that there were some backstage problems between producers and Tobey Maguire. Tobey Maguire wanted more money, and Sam Raimi was like, I don't know about that. I think I'll just replace you with Jake Gyllenhaal. Eventually, Tobey decided to come back to the role. He didn't really care, and I can't imagine this movie without Tobey Maguire. I'm really happy he stuck around, because Jake Gyllenhaal, even though he's one of my favorite actors, life would be weird without Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man after the first movie. Rosemary Harris, once again as Aunt May, is still super warm. She feels like your most gentle, kind, loving aunt that you could ever have, even though she looks a lot older than your everyday aunt. I guess she's a great aunt. I never really read the comics, so I have no idea. But hey, Rosemary Harris is excellent as this character again. And this time around, taking over as the film's main villain is Alfred Molina, playing Dr. Otto Octavius, otherwise known as Doc Ock. What makes his villain really good, and probably even better than Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, is that him and Peter have very similar character arcs in this movie. Both of them have their dreams, but unfortunately, they have to give them up by the end of the film. And what's also great is that Peter, at the beginning of this film, looks at Dr. Otto Octavius as a role model. He's writing a paper about him. He is super stoked to meet him. The only thing that really sucks for Peter is that, well, him and Doc Ock end up being very big enemies this entire movie. That's, of course, after an accident happens during Otto's experiment. That then leads into this terrifying hospital scene. As a kid, it scared the heck out of me, and as a 23-year-old, it still scares the heck out of me. So Otto is being manipulated by his robotic arms, just like how in the first movie, Norman is manipulated by that green gas. Both characters, while I love the actors and the characters themselves, I do think are a bit underwritten because they don't have actual motivations. both of them just lose their minds because they aren't controlling their brains anymore. It's something else. Now, a good portion of Spider-Man 2 revolves around Peter and Mary Jane's relationship. Peter is clearly still in love with Mary Jane, and Mary Jane has very strong feelings for him. The only problem is that Peter is not able to be there for Mary Jane half of the time because he's Spider-Man, and Mary Jane gets really upset about this. And to make matters even worse, Mary Jane is seeing somebody else. They eventually get engaged. This makes Peter very upset. But one thing they never bring up is how J. Jonah Jameson's son is the one who's getting engaged to Mary Jane, and we never see Peter and J. Jonah Jameson clash over this matter, because if you've seen the whole movie, you know that Mary Jane and Peter get back together, and we never hear about this between J. Jonah Jameson and Peter. I'm sure if they ever brought it up, though, that would become a really awkward conversation. But one thing I never understood is, why does Peter look so shocked when he sees Mary Jane with somebody else? The man had his chance. The ball was in his park, but he never took his shot because he's Spider-Man. He can't put Mary Jane in danger by being with her. Dude, just be with her. She's gorgeous. For the most part, Spider-Man 2 does the same thing that made Spider-Man 1 so good. As a whole, too, like the first one, it's a hilarious movie. A lot of the humor comes from J.K. Simmons. As J. Jonah Jameson, the man is a laughing machine. Overall, I found myself laughing a whole bunch, even though I've seen this movie close to 50 or more times. I have no idea at this point. This film has plenty of wit, and I feel like a lot of people who watch this movie for the first time will find plenty of humor here. So Peter makes the decision to quit being Spider-Man. He can't take it anymore. He needs to get his life back together without being the superhero. It's a sad scene, and for some reason we don't get superhero storylines like this anymore in Hollywood. I wish we did, because this is a deep and profound story. Also, directly after this, we have a montage where we see Peter Parker's life after he has given up being Spider-Man. It's a hysterical montage, and the song Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head plays in the background. I love it. But if you thought Peter could go on for a really long time without being Spider-Man, well, you were wrong. Because Peter sees a fire, he hears that a little girl is trapped in there, he helps her. This is one of my favorite moments in Spider-Man 2, because Peter performs this heroic act when he's not Spider-Man, and it sends a great message to everyone that you don't have to be a superhero to do super things. This then leads into another great moment where Aunt May kind of convinces Peter to be Spider-Man again, as she gives him one of the most powerful speeches in superhero history. She talks all about how everyone is a hero. Aunt May is the one in the film that gets Peter back to being Spider-Man. If it weren't for her, he would not be Spider-Man anymore, and I'm sure that crime would skyrocket even more. This scene also alludes to Aunt May possibly knowing that Peter is Spider-Man. Whether or not she knows that he is Spider-Man is still unknown, but it certainly seems like she does here. So after Mary Jane is captured by Doc Ock, this is the part of the movie where you want to stand up and cheer, because Spider-Man is finally back. He's ready to fight crime and take down this evil Otto Octavius, which leads into an incredible train sequence. It's one of the best superhero fight sequences of all time. Peter heroically stops this train that's moving at full force, and people actually see Parker's face without the mask on. Though the moment that Harry finds out that Peter is Spider-Man is priceless. The look on his face tells the whole story. It's one of those scenes that when it happens, you are in the moment and you cannot wait to see what's going to happen next in the story. The only thing I don't get is why Peter doesn't just sit down Harry and explain to him what happened between him and Norman. It's that easy. So Peter arrives at Doc Ock's River Shack, where he's keeping Mary Jane captive. It's an exciting finale to Spider-Man 2, and this is where Peter and Otto's stories align. Peter tells Otto, just like how Peter understood earlier, that sometimes you have to give up your dream. This then leads to Otto finally taking back his brain. He has power over his electronic arms, and he decides to do the good thing by taking down this science experiment, which then leads to his eventual death. It's a great way to end Otto Octavius' storyline by allowing him to redeem himself and sacrificing himself to save the entire city. His character takes complete 360 turn in this movie. And luckily for Peter, Mary Jane stands up J. Jonah Jameson's son, and she gets back together with Peter, who accepts that Mary Jane can make her own decisions. If she wants to be with Peter, she can. You could not end Spider-Man 2 on a better note than that. Peter and Mary Jane are meant to be together. They have been teasing this for the longest time over the course of the first two movies, and it finally happened. All that was left was everyone's anticipation for Spider-Man 3. Where is the story going to go next? Well, a lot of people hate Spider-Man 3, and eventually I will get to my review of that. All I have to say so far is that I don't hate it nearly as much as other people. Spider-Man 2 is incomplete without Spider-Man 1 and vice versa. These two movies, like I said, are interchangeable. They are both great superhero movies, two of my favorite superhero movies of all time. I love many others, but these two are the ones that I grew up watching and love to this day. It would not make sense for me to give this movie any score other than a 100%. So if you guys were unaware of my love of Spider-Man 1 and 2 after my first 4.5 years on this platform, now that is cemented with my perfect scores for both Spider-Man 1 and 2. These two movies are my favorite superhero movies of all time, and I don't think that's ever going to change. Of course though, guys, if you also happen to enjoy Spider-Man 2, let me down below in the comment section what your thoughts are of it. If you guys think this is the best Spider-Man movie of all time, let me know. Or is this movie not as good as Spider-Man 1 or even some of the newer Spider-Man movies? Of course though, guys, if you are new to my channel, click the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.